Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lisa Hollywood. I'm a second-year urban design student at the GSD. So the previous panel touched upon some of the social impacts of infrastructure, and this following panel will focus more on social issues, looking at housing and social justice in existing cities. So the concept of social justice in the city is a generally agreed upon goal, yet its definition is nebulous, and in practice it is often secondary to economic concerns. With the design community's increasing attention to the social impacts of the built environment, evidenced in part by this year's Venice Biennale theme, how can the idea of equity in urban centers be furthered? Contemporary models propose socially equitable urban systems, with movements like social urbanism aiming to strengthen disadvantaged neighborhoods by creating new centralities in the form of democratic public amenities and new connective urban infrastructure. Increasingly, theorists and practitioners are considering equal access to jobs, public space, transportation, a mix of uses, and public amenities as necessary elements to creating quality living conditions. Still, housing, the most basic human necessity, is often the first battleground on which architects, planners, and policymakers attempt to make the city more inclusive. As urban populations continue to grow and affordable housing becomes more elusive, a range of tactics to promote the right to reside in the city are emerging, consisting of proposals that hybridize housing types, include a mix of complementary uses to support housing, and engage with policy to incentivize density and affordability. Over the last 2 decades, Barcelona has had a robust public housing program. However, also of importance is the construction of public facilities, which has tripled during this time. These relatively evenly distributed facilities accommodate education, health, leisure, and culture programs and expand the notion of equitable design beyond housing. So today, our 3 panelists will give brief presentations discussing the issue of social justice in the city. Our first presenter will be Josep Bohigas. He's an architect, and he has held the position of associate professor at the ETSAB since 2008, and he is co-director of the Master of Lighting at the Polytechnic University of Catalonia. He has curated several housing exhibitions, such as Barraca Barcelona in 2003 and Piso Piloto in 2015. As an architect, he has worked on a variety of projects, including museums and social housing projects. And he has received several FAD awards in architecture and urbanism, the City of Barcelona Design Award in 2007, and the Architecture Award in 2014. Today, he will be speaking about the problem of housing in Barcelona and Medellin, discussing alternative solutions to inclusive housing. Felipe Correa is an associate professor in the Department of Urban Planning and Design and the director of the Urban Design degree program. His work focuses on the confluence of architecture, urbanism, and infrastructure, both through his design practice, Somatic Collective, and through his research. He's the co-founder and director of the South America Project and has produced numerous publications, writings, exhibitions, and lectures. He recently published Beyond the City, Resource Extraction Urbanism in South America, and Mexico City Between Geometry and Geography. Today, Felipe will be speaking about affordable housing in Latin America and how it might suggest more generic urban housing models. And finally, we have Maria Ribera de Ventos. She's an architect and professor of both urban planning at the ETSAB and in Master of Landscape Architecture program also at UPC. She's taught at universities worldwide and has worked on numerous urban projects in Barcelona and other cities in Spain, such as the expansion of the Congress of Deputies in Madrid. She is a researcher at the Barcelona Urbanism Laboratory and has done extensive research, often in collaboration with our other panelist, Parcerisa, including the Innovation District 22 at Barcelona. Her publications include Metropolitan Galaxies, La Ciudad no es una hoja blanca, and Places Porchadas, Catalunya. Today, she will talk about strategies for remaking existing cities, looking at Barcelona's ability to support affordable housing integrated with its surroundings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josep Bohigas.
Well, good morning. First, I have to say thank you and sorry. Thank you to be here. I'm very glad to come back to to Harvard, and sorry because I have a lot of slides and I don't know if I'll be able with my English to run through and to be very complete the minutes that we have. I don't know, this is the, I have two. It's the same. Okay. I wanted to talk about this exhibition we made last year, Piso Piloto, which is held in CCCB, in the Center of Contemporary Culture in Barcelona, talking about housing. The problem of Barcelona, or the issue of the exhibition, was that we think that during all these years, from the 80s till nowadays, we've been really worried and working through mainly the regeneration of public space. I think we talk these days about the model, and I think that the model, everybody understands that is a model constrained mainly on this public realm, which we talked, and Carlos Muro yesterday shown that book of Reconstructing Barcelona was in fact a strategy to recuperate all this public space that we lost during 40 years, or that we had to rebuild, to reintegrate into the city. But after all these years, and here we see a map of all the projects that we've been going through during these years, what we realize is that during all these years, we kind of forgot something that was maybe most important of all, which was the housing problem. When we see like the first slogans, or the first poster that Mariscal did during the 80s, we realized that it was a very beautiful and synthesized slogan about what we were trying to do, Barcelona. Bar, of course, was the bar culture that we have, and we recognized during the 80s, like they were the real spaces where the discussions were about that emerging culture. Cel, because is the sky. I think we had at that point the first time that we start raising up our vision to a new sky, to a new future of the city. And Ona, of course, because was a territory to conquer this slogan that was to turn the city to the sea. It was like one of the main issues. But when we see how these slogans went through, the other slogans like Barcelona Posa't Guapa also explains very much, which means Barcelona, make yourself pretty. Explains a little bit what was the intention. The intention, we thought that we had a very ugly city, and we had to make ourselves prettier, so we had to clean our facades, we have to repave our public space, and to recuperate this this view that the section of the city, to have like this new stage. A stage that when the years go on, we realized that was a stage that at the beginning they call it that was for the citizens, but we realized that during those years became a stage for somebody else, which now is the tourism or a huge speculation on the city. But of course these slogans went even worse. We see this one that says Barcelona, the best shop in the world, which also gives you an idea of what was this stage about. It was a stage to sell the city and to become like this beautiful, this great space to sell up to other strategies, not the public realm. Now, the last slogan was this idea of inspiration, an inspiration of really had recuperate all these public spaces that we didn't have, but we recuperated to this beautiful image of a woman on the sea. In the back we have like this 5-star hotel colonizing this sea that we recuperated, but instead was recuperated to have like these other citizens, which are not citizens in this case, are the tourism that is really taking care of these spaces. Of course, all the strategy that we had at the beginning in the 80s, that was, okay, let's have these spaces to become part of the city or for the citizens. We are now at one point that at the same spaces we lost them all. This guy that if you go to La Ramblas, yesterday we said that is one of the most beautiful streets in the world. I say that citizens in Barcelona, we never go to La Ramblas. It's a terrible place to walk around. And the best thing is that we have sometimes this guy here and other people rehearsing and claiming to recuperate the spaces that at the beginning we gained and now we have lost. We see here adeu, that means goodbye, goodbye Ramblas, goodbye Parc Güell, goodbye Paseo de Gracia, goodbye Barceloneta, all these beautiful places that we gained. But not only the people in the street, also intellectuals, people that they write books like Manuel Delgado, La Ciudad Mentirosa, the lying city, I would say, something like that, which is a lie that we've been going through, a lie that was where we were recuperating the city, and that in fact there's a lie behind, which in fact was a big business. Or people like Horacio Capel, a geographer, the model of Barcelona, and a critic exam, which I think is a beautiful, more calm, not like Manuel Delgado essay about what happened, or others like I Hate Barcelona, or Urbanalization of another geographer, Francesc Muñoz. So at that point, which I went very fast in order to demonstrate you that we really have a big problem. We have a beautiful, beautiful public spaces that we can even eat on those pavements because they are, as Josep has explained before, we have this beautiful design for our pedestrians, but we forgot maybe what was happening behind those walls, behind the walls of the city. We talk very much about cleaning, about refurbishing, but in fact we never talked about what's happening behind those walls. So that the exhibition it's a little bit about, no? And we say that, and this is a quote by the other curator of the exhibition, Alex Jimenez, that he always says, if the city is a paella, sorry for the Spanish quote, but housing it is rice, and maybe we did a lot of things. We did a lot of shrimps. We did a lot of. We built up all this other stuff, but we forgot the most important part of the city, which was the rice. So the housing problem, we have many housing problems. I mean, they are really important, but we concentrate them in like two sentences: houses without city and city without houses, which is something that is not only on Barcelona. It happens also in Medellin, which the exhibition was about these two cities. We have houses without city in the outskirts, places which we forgot, and there are people living there, but there's no city to hold them. And there are city without houses, which is city like El Born or some neighborhoods in the city, which there is city, there are plazas, but there are no people living there because we only have Airbnbs now. Or in the center of Medellin, it's a commercial, wonderful place during the day, but at 7 o'clock everybody leaves, and you have a city which nobody lives there. Or people, another even greater problem, which people without houses and houses without people. You know that we have like at least 88, well, it depends on how you count it, but some people say 23,000 or 88,000 empty houses, something that we have to count. And if we didn't count it, it's maybe because we didn't care. And also houses without people, we have between 10 or 15 evictions per day in Barcelona. So like this paradoxical conditions, it's part of the problem.
2 minutes left.
What, 2 minutes? Oof. Then I have to run. So the exhibition took several hashtags. The tenures, the informal access, the price, the typologies, which of course we know that the laws in Spain are terrible because we still work and design like the family house when we know that there are many other demands on housing. The evictions, the empty houses, the cooperatives, the refurbishing, the full poverty, which we have the 10% of people who don't heat their houses, and we know that this is a very, very problem on cost on health and the health services. The emergency, the homeless, gentrification, which I'm not going to stop there, but as you understand, we are losing every 5 years, we're losing one neighborhood, and health. So we didn't want to be so pessimistic, and of course the exhibition was an optimistic claim, because we think that many people, just because the government didn't do anything to solve the problem, many people has invented new ways to solve that problem, no? With different strategies. Putting the people in the center of the municipal policies maybe would be a way to change what happened. The inside a strategy, you know, we were talking yesterday with Carlos Muro about the Noli plan. We are talking about the black, not the white. We're talking about what's happening in that black box, and thinking that maybe we can make a new cartography of the city by starting there, talking with the people and knowing exactly how they live, and then maybe think which kind of street you need. And of course, this idea of tactical and pilot housing, which of course is against the quality and the quantity. You know? We need to do a lot of house, and we know that the best house we need to do is a house which is taking care of the people. So this is slower, and the quantity is less. So we went through many projects. There are more than 70 projects that now we are doing in several parts of the world, which is constructing an archive of different solutions about cooperatives, different ways to design. Of course, this is a beautiful picture of how they designed this house, La Col, in an occupied space in Barcelona. La PA, the work that they have done for eviction, with just changing the laws. Some new projects about homeless, which they take care of this idea of the first house, the house zero, making an evolution of the housing first. Projects about fuel poverty, a beautiful project, this one that won the decathlon, the solar decathlon in Paris, and they are implemented. The co-housing, Masovería Urbana, which I don't know how to translate it, but means something that you don't pay for your house, but you help the owner to refurbish it, so you interchange work, and many other projects. No? At the end, what we were saying is that we can make a plan of thinking about the city. I hate when we talk about the city of the future, and I prefer to talk the future of the citizens. And I think that this is the idea of not thinking about a future, but not thinking about the city of the future, but realize that the city of the future is already built. So thinking about how we could work with the city itself means that we could build 100,000 houses, but not building any other neighborhood. And this was an opportunity to end up the exhibition with the three main points that we wanted to underline of how we should treat this problem. One, it's about reform, or we call rehabilitar, which is with this symbol of the crab that doesn't have a shell, no? I don't know how you say it in El Cangrejo Ermitaño, which every time he needs to change the house, he just goes out and finds another shell to live in, or cohabit, which means that we are living together. So I think that most of the strategies of being one to each other, with the party wall for us was a beautiful symbol of a metaphor of this, not thinking about which are the party walls that are redefining the idea of the house, and maybe this is the first step to scale up and to define which kind of city we need, and to try to think that living together means something. And of course, the most difficult and the most important is to cooperate. No? We say that the best ideas, they are the best ideas that are not yours or mine, they are the best ideas which are in the middle. And by to try to find that point, we need to structure another policy to work around the housing. We always say that the metaphor to describe this is the mayonnaise. No? You put egg, you put oil, and then there's a miracle that comes out of that. And I think the 50 projects or the 70 projects that we have in this archive, they are little miracles of people that they dissolve themselves into a conversation where new typologies and new strategies came out. Well, Leonardo. I have a beautiful project to tell you more specifically, but then you will have to invite me another time. Thank you.
Okay, well, good afternoon. By now, I'm very, very happy to be here, to be part of this conference. I am not from Barcelona. I come from the fourth floor here, but after working with Joan with so many years, sometimes I think I am from Barcelona, and of course the work of the Laboratorio de Urbanismo has always been very, very influential to me. Okay, so Latin American examples, a continent in 10 minutes, perfectly doable if I speak a little faster than normal. So here we go. Project as model, from experimental housing projects to generic urban types. When we see the most ubiquitous landscapes of affordable housing in Latin America, an immediate contradiction appears. On the one hand, as a region, the majority of its most recent affordable housing production has resulted in peripheral dormitory cities guided by the financial formula of repetitive cells. Yet, on the other hand, the continent throughout the 20th century has witnessed an incredible instrumental diversity in the design of experimental housing projects that perhaps open more nuanced positions regarding the right to housing, the right to the city, and design. In 1939, the Exposición Panamericana de la Vivienda hosted in Buenos Aires, along with the construction of El Falanasterio, a New Deal project built in Puerto Rico in 1937, set the stage for an entire century of government-sponsored experimental housing projects. From the reinterpretation of neighborhood units in the Lima of the 1940s, to the use of brick as a socioeconomic unifier in Bogotá, to the development of microblocks in 1970s Buenos Aires, a significant collection of canonical projects set the stage for new relationships between domesticity and urban life, establishing design principles that can help rethink the current state of design of affordable housing in the region, especially given the recent push for denser inner-city housing in the context of large South American metropolis. So within this context, I would actually like to, for the brevity of time, bring three pressing issues that I believe are confronting issues of housing, the city, and design. And the first one, I think I share a similar thought as Josep, which has to do with the break between the right to the city and the right to housing. If we actually look at housing production in major metropolitan areas, major cities like Mexico City, until the 1940s, there was a direct alignment of public works, mobility infrastructure, and the production of housing through blocks. If we actually take a look here, you see the investment in public works in magenta, and then the development of, in this case, the Casa Adosada, which was a prototype that built significant areas outside of the historic center. If we actually move to the 1980s and 1990s, we actually begin to see the development of dormitory cities, what are called peripheral clustered housing enclaves, which have complete disconnect to where the investment in infrastructure is going, right? All the money is going to the periférico and the double-decker, and housing becomes a private real estate venture primarily funded by global capital funds. I think in this context, for me, it is very important to then go back and look at what are sort of the more canonical projects within the region that can actually begin to give us certain references for the production of inner-city housing within this context. For me, one of perhaps the most important projects has to do, is El Silencio by Carlos Raúl Villanueva in Caracas, not only because of the development of a very traditional block morphology in the exterior, and then a very experimental modernist retreat that allowed for an increased amount of density within the interior, but also because of the decision from the city to actually place housing in one of the most important central axes in a site that had been sort of left as a void because of a pest that killed a significant amount of the inhabitants in the area in the late 1800s, but that was actually requalified in the 20th century to place affordable housing. And here you can see the relationship between an exterior block that reconstitutes the block, puts commercial on the lower levels, and then the way that sort of the modernist block then protrudes inside each courtyard. I think this model of sort of rethinking housing in terms of high density mid-rise blocks becomes extremely important as major metropolitan areas in Latin America are going to continue to release significant amount of post-industrial land. In this case, this is an aerial view of Mexico City. But also begin to rethink a significant amount of large-scale infrastructures that can actually be reduced and land that can be released for other uses. In this case, beginning to look at sort of what will soon become the old airport, the Central de Abasto, infrastructures that have to be rethought that are in direct connection with the existing mass transit infrastructure. The second aspect for me has to do with the spatial limits of housing clusters and the economies of scale that produce them, right? This is a very recent project in the periphery of Caracas, where, of course, the scale of production has nothing to do with what we might understand as the different scales of community. What constructs community and what constructs government housing projects is completely misaligned. In this context, for me, I think it's very important to very briefly take a look at a city like Lima, where I think throughout the 20th century saw an incredible push for housing as an element that could actually become part of a larger sort of urban language. This, of course, happens because of the incredible coincidence of having both someone who was both an architect and a president, first mayor of the city and then a president, Fernando Belaunde, but that actually developed a series of, I think, very important experimental projects that have to be revisited today. The first one being the Unidad Vecinal 3, where many ideas of the neighborhood unit get translated and redeployed in the context of the Latin American city, where public services are placed in the center, and then very diversified typologies begin to accommodate each edge, connecting to the rest of the city. Another, I think, very important example is Enrique Siriani's San Felipe complex, where a collection of sort of towers and bars begin to modulate the quality of open space and the types of open space in the ground floor. And a very recent photograph of the project begins to continues to show the value of sort of the strategy between mass and public space in this context. I think in many ways, of course, this is a more well-known project, Previ Lima, well-known primarily because of how many people, how many sort of approaches to self-built housing got concentrated in a single experiment, but perhaps a little bit less known in another strategy that I think for me was very interesting, which had to do with the idea of not awarding the entire competition to a single strategy, but developing a strategy of blocks where each architect actually was able to develop a scale of block that constructed a community in relation to the totality of the project. Here we see Previ Lima in the 70s. Here we see Previ Lima today, a project that over time has completely been absorbed by the fabric of the city. Good, I only have one more point. So, and the third one, for me, has to do with the idea of housing, the self-built, and the incorporation of the self-built, or what's generally known as informal neighborhoods, into the sort of legal life of the city. And I think for me, of course, there's been a lot that has been talked about the gradual transformation and sort of adaptation of informal settlements. But I think there's another aspect, in this case, Mexico City. Over 50% of Mexico City could actually be defined as self-built. Not all informal, but self-built. But I think for me, the other critical component of this has to do with the way that new housing typologies can actually not only transform existing self-built neighborhoods, but also introduce a different variety of housing types. In this case, the Conjunto Habitacional Novo Padre Santo Amaro in Sao Paulo, I think we actually see the introduction of a very interesting sort of linear bar building, very Paulista in its architecture, but also the introduction of a public park that allows for the connection between the upper part of the city to the lower part of the city, and therefore becoming a thoroughfare that actually gives a great level of activity in the ground. Or other projects like Vivienda Social Heliopolis, where there's the gradual transformation of an informal settlement into a new set of block typologies that actually provide a significant amount of upgrades in the context of domestic life. And here we begin to see some of the examples of the BUILD project. Finally, to end and to, in many ways, leave this a little bit more open as a question, for me, the next challenges have to do not only with rethinking the larger metropolitan areas, but also seeing the opportunities for the confluence between larger planning strategies and specific design interventions in secondary cities in Latin America. In fact, those are the cities of greatest growth in the region, and it's really the Mantas, the Natals, the Iquitos of the world that I think need the agency of design so that they don't actually make the same mistakes that were actually done in some of the larger metropolitan regions. In this case, this is a project that we are working right now in the office in Porto Alegre that aims at bringing a new centrality with co-working, with municipal offices, with mixed use, to be able to create an open block typology that might allow to be able to move some of sort of the centrality, some of the labor from the center of the city, and establish a new centrality in the periphery. Thank you.
Go.
You might need this.
How does it work?
Forward, back, pointer.
Goes, no? Okay. My thanks to Mohsen Mostafavi and Diane Davis for giving us the opportunity to discuss these apparently local problems from a global perspective. Thanks also to Ramon Torres for his ongoing faith in my contributions to the city of Barcelona. And finally, thanks you, Joan, for your mentorship and collaboration throughout the years. Housing, like health or education, is a universal right. But in order to create enough affordable housing to secure that right, I want to argue that we first need to attend to more than the agglomeration or design of residential units and focus on the other underlying urban conditions that make those units livable. If we truly want to solve the housing shortage in a city like Barcelona, it will require more than establishing new patterns and typologies. We have to study each individual area in detail and try to build upon what's already there. A bad home in a good neighborhood with good facilities and ample public transportation is far better than a great home in an isolated wasteland. Vast areas of Barcelona are waiting to be counted as real neighborhoods, areas capable of absorbing and sustaining new housing and preventing sprawl. In order to foster more interesting and attractive places to live, work and enjoy, and in turn to trigger the kinds of new and improved affordable housings this area most need, certain underlying conditions have to be addressed. I'd like to focus on urban conditions in the housing projects built between 1950 and 1975, that today more than 2,000 people call home. In contrast to the slum clearance popular in the 50s, what's called for today is 1, injecting new construction in the underutilized open spaces, fill in, 2, breaking up giant superblocks, fragment, and 3, blurring the boundaries that cut off entire districts from the surrounding cities, dissolve. Employed in concert, such tactics stand to take existing neighborhoods that make up more than 20% of the metropolis and transform them into more diverse, vibrant social environments by improving the existing. I will also discuss an ongoing collaborative project in Poblenou, a formerly industrial area downtown that is today in the focus of intense interest, and it's incorporating new facilities and public housing. Next, here. Okay. In 1942, Joseph Louis Serre, newly arrived in America, famously posed the question, can our city survive? This photomontage by Herbert Bayer captures the crisis over overcrowding and unsanitary conditions in low-income housing, portraying masses of people packed into a tin of sardines. In the background, we see the American cityscape and new road patterns that threaten to disperse and dilute it during what was to become the area of slum clearance. My contention is that this system of roadways left lasting scars and vast urban wastelands scattered throughout the metropolis. In Barcelona, the problem is particularly acute. Over the past 30 years, we have continued building a tangle of roadways and roundabouts as if we were still living in the 30s and the car were a new invention. But as you can see from the exhibition, Barcelona Metropolis also boasts a variety of complex, dense urban textures. During that same period, we built facilities of different scales and extended Oriol Bohiga's public space policy that started in the 80s. The facilities in outlying neighborhoods today, community centers, libraries, clinics, schools, new parks and plazas, often surpass those of the city core and have transformed not only the face of many barrios, but also their self-esteem. The energy devoted to reclaiming an inaccessible shoreline, woodlands and river deltas has fundamentally changed life on the city's periphery as well. Public transportation was never on the agenda. However, even though it is one of the few things known to alleviate a shortage of affordable housing, by focusing on a handful of interventions like transit, we can effectively integrate isolated areas into the urban fabric. There is no need to extend outward. There's plenty of available space to build within these existing areas. In the slide you see 8 different housing projects we are studying, Badia among them, the one in the middle. Each presents a unique set of challenges, but what they all have in common is that, whether it be due to geography or surrounding infrastructures, they are all cut off from the rest of the city. All have too much open space that's difficult to organize. Streets from the contiguous neighborhoods don't go all the way through, and this lack of permeability only reinforces their crippling isolation. What we discover is that more than income levels or which populations of migrants first inhabited the housing, it's these surrounding urban conditions that define their viability as thriving urban communities. On paper, Bellvitge and Badia are very similar. The number of units, resident, median incomes. The housing is similar, the blocks too. Yet how is that Bellvitge is considered a good neighborhood and Badia is known to be one of the most crime-ridden areas in the entire metropolis? With Barcelona's highest eviction rate, the distinguishing factor, it turns out, is their access to public transport and connection to the city core. Their respective positions relative to public transit, new housing, commercial activity, and public space offer a clue to what's happening and what can be done. Bellvitge is adjacent to one of the best hospitals in the country and close to the airport. Even though there is no continuity, the commercial facilities aren't well located and there is too much repetition, it's still considered one of the best barrios to live in Hospitalet, a city, 250,000 people, let's say, sort of what Cambridge is to Boston. Our study mapped the connectivity of Bellvitge and Badia to 23 of Barcelona major facilities, universities, hospitals, parks. A central avenue links Bellvitge to the core of Hospitalet, with excellent connections to the institutions and services. Badia, on the other hand, lies farther out and is completely cut off from the university next. It's 27 minutes to go from Badia to university. That's just across the expressway. To make housing projects like this integral parts of the city, we need to begin by breaking down or dissolving their borders. My colleagues, Oriol Clos, Josep Parcerisa, and I developed a plan for Badia all the way back in, all the way back, that's the plan. That's an image of the plan. All the way back in 1984. That would have, 1, reduce the number and size of open spaces, 2, create smaller plots upon which to build new housing and businesses, 3, connect the street system to the surrounding areas. In 2006, Badia was also the focus of a major exhibition at the Fundación Tàpies in Barcelona, dealing with the empty city, curated by the artist Pedro G. Romero. In this painting, I try to express the absurdity of these in-between spaces and the neighborhood's crippling mental and physical isolation. The criteria for interventions in this barrio needs to be rethought one by one. The principles of THEAM Modern Functional City, that is, and zoning, including variety in the housing prototypes and disorder, inserting La Rue Corridor and the avenues, inverting the principle of healthy emptying by selectively filling in, imagining transformation and evolution of the site, in other words, understanding that demolition, substitution, transformation, and additions are not dirty words for these areas. Okay. More recently, I have just 2 slides. More recently, we have been focused on another morphology, yet another kind of urban fabric. In the formerly industrial area of Poblenou, scattered new construction and rehabilitation is popping up. How is it possible that Poblenou, smack in the middle of Barcelona, remains underdeveloped? Isn't it bizarre that beautiful houses like this one are empty? Maybe because it takes more than twice that time to get between the two on public transit. Poblenou promises to become the city's hippest new neighborhood, and that's missing in the equivalent of New York. What's missing is the equivalent of New York L train, some sort of rapid transit to activate it. And just as you have seen in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the problem is how does one rein in the voracity of real estate developers and tourism in effecting that kind of transformations. The main corridor of Poblenou is Pere IV. Last spring, a group of 6 of us, among them Eulalia Gomez, worked with our students to study this one street. And we discovered that, the first thing we discovered was that the park that bisects Pere IV in 2, a beautiful Jean Nouvel project, stops also to most of the street's activity. We built a model that spans the length of Pere IV Street and proposes more than 8 interventions. The model, now in the Barcelona City History Museum, can be used as a thought exercise to insert new housing. We have to distribute projects among a range of different operators and collectivities. If we do, we'll foster the diversity of programs, people, and opportunities we need to create a more equitable city. Let me finish with these 2 images of affordable housing built between 1959 and 1970s, before all we have been discussing in these exhibitions. 2 projects that have most in common, that is, variety of housing, interesting public space, and experimentation. In Caño Roto, this is Madrid, but could be in Barcelona, the housing types are delicately designed, the public areas just beautiful. This is not a playground by Annie and Aldo Van Eyck, but the reference is obvious. The architect Álvarez de Castro went to live there. That's his wife in the photo. Walden 7 is a singular experiment in residential development along Barcelona's periphery, a kasbah that organized 1,000 units, food units, I don't know, the size I don't know. This cluster of houses and facilities and also of ideas, suggest a beehive in its inner public spaces. Many of the architects who work on these projects went to live there. Ricardo Bofill still has his extraordinary office inside the cement factory that was saved from demolition. These days, at least in Spain, access to affordable housing has to do not only with a shortage of units, as in the post-war period, but rather with a shortage of funds, not units, but funds, money, on the part of the majority to be able to afford the rent or the down payment. The pressures of real estate speculation run amok, haven't helped. Let's find the fringes and in-between spaces in which to insert affordable housing in these 2 urban fabrics. Thank you.
So I want to thank all of our panelists for really great presentations. So it's clear that social justice is more than just housing. It's a combination of housing and how it connects to social infrastructure and transit, whether it's what Josep was talking about in Barcelona, where some of the certain neighborhoods, public facilities are provided for, and the focus needs to be more on the housing, or whether it's in Latin America, where there's a need for more connection to transportation and also adequate public facilities. So I think now we can open it up to questions from the audience, if there are any questions.
Hello. There were some wonderful examples shown by you, and thanks for the presentations since the morning. I think incredible presentations, a lot to learn for us. My question comes from the context of the developing world, the emerging world, where we see that the governments have really failed to provide affordable housing or social housing, and there's a confusion that who is responsible for housing? Do we leave housing to the private developers, who of course have their profit motives, or should housing be a state subject? Because in the emerging world where, majority of the people can't really afford to buy the houses that are available, you see a manifestation of urban dwellings which are not really habitable, which we really can't call a house. So what's the take of the panel on housing? Should it be a state subject, or should we leave it to the private sector to cater to the demands? Thank you.
I think only if we treat it as health or education and giving the opportunity to have a sort of a parallel market, this is going to be solved. Otherwise, it's impossible, because the pressure of the real estate, and it's okay, on cities, and especially in the core of the cities, has made this impossible. I mean, yeah, the situation cannot be addressed without a parallel economy, or that's how it's...
Adding to that, and I think speaking more specifically about Latin America, but I think a phenomenon that also happens across the global south and sort of it shares many parallels with South Asia and Southeast Asia. I think if you look at the larger history of housing throughout the 20th century, these are regions that throughout the 40s, throughout the 50s, housing was an integral part of larger developmentalist projects, state government run, top-down, and those came with their advantages and disadvantages, right? One, significant amounts of emphasis put on housing, but also housing was seen in a very technocratic manner, purely as the provision of residential cells. Yet you actually have interesting counterexamples, like, for example, the one that I showed, the Complejo Urbano Miguel Alemán, for example, in Mexico City, where Mario Pani made a very effective emphasis in calling his projects urban complexes, right? Not housing projects. I think from there, you actually move to a period of neoliberalism, right, where the government relinquished responsibility in terms of direct nation-state provision of housing, and sort of these larger sort of public-private partnerships through financing incentives took place. And I think what you're beginning to see now, which is very small in scale, but is beginning to be very effective, has to do with certain municipal authorities taking control on the production of housing and actually setting the negotiation, setting the stage for inner city land to actually be available for public-private partnerships that might generate affordable housing. I think, for example, in a city like Sao Paulo, I've been having these sort of conversations with the city for a variety of reasons. They're actually thinking, for example, in decking between 12 and 24 linear kilometers of inner city rail to be able to provide sites for affordable housing. So as an initiative, right, it's sponsored by the state. The municipality will have to negotiate a lot of those conditions. And then the question is, what become the larger public-private partnerships that can actually make those projects be designed in a manner that they become an integral part of the city. But I think to answer your question specifically, I think today the responsibility and the potential lies in public-private partnerships that are directly administered with strong municipalities.
Well, I don't know in United States, I guess too, but in Spain, our constitution says that every citizen deserves a dignified, a good house. If the constitution says so, it's obvious that the public should solve this great problem. In this sense, it's obvious that it has to be public. Of course, there's the other hand, which was explaining that more than 70 cases, they are all private, which I think it's also interesting to understand that as we said I said many times, I think that everything is housing, everything. If you don't have a house, you don't have an address, you cannot vote, so it means you don't exist. So it's very important to understand that the first step of the right to the city and the right to the city is to have a house. And after that, every effort, every investment that the city does in any other object, like building bridges or building railroads or doing any other project, should be always a part, to think about what this is affecting to the house. So I would say that, of course, there is a public initiative, and we have to take care of this huge problem that we have of people that don't exist. But at the same time, we have to think that every work that we make, that the government does, should be a part to allow these private investigations or private solutions that somehow come up, emerge easily. I don't know if I explained myself right, but.
I think we can take one more question.
So I just wanted to clarify something about Barcelona. This word desahucio is one that, rightly or wrongly, I associate with what we call foreclosure, because of my impression of Barcelona, and as opposed to the idea of eviction, which is what, you know, I come from a city of renters, and so foreclosure in New York is something that we tend to think about as something that happens somewhere else, and eviction is, you know, what happens to most New Yorkers if they're going to get kicked out of their house. And I'm just wondering about that distinction. Is my impression correct? And what are the implications of that? In a way, it's kind of a public-private question. Alquiler. Versus owning.
Now, well, I think that now the problem we have in Barcelona, of course, it started with evictions with the banks, but now it's not anymore. The 70% of the evictions we have, they are just rental evictions. I don't know if this is the difference that you were asking for, but in any case, is the same problem. Of course, we are trying to negotiate with banks to solve that problem, and this problem is almost solved because it's not anymore. This has been stopped, but now the problem is the chain reaction that had with private owners, that they are evicting the people that they cannot afford to pay the rents. And this is, I would say, like one of the most important plans we have ahead, with how to control rents. Otherwise, we will end up constructing more railroads to make poor people live in the outskirts, which they won't be able to pay their cars because they won't be able to pay their food, and so we will start again all these great problems. So I think that the key problem of the future of the city now, it's around the controlling, like they are doing in Paris and in Berlin, to try to control rents.
The problem maybe is we don't have, the rate of rent in Barcelona is really low because we are a country of buyers, of people that own their house. So there was a culture in Spain after
the social, but the 70% of the people that they live in Barcelona are renting.
No.
but the social rent is very low, it's 1% only. So that's a problem. That's a problem also of gentrification. We are now dealing with a great problem of the center of the city, which I think today there was a news that every month we are losing 200 people in the center of the city. And it's about the impossibility that we have to control rents at that point.
May I? Just one reflection question. I was looking at the exhibition as well, thinking about this, how transferable some of the experiences of Barcelona can be somewhere else, no? Or can be exported somewhere else or implemented somewhere else. Reflecting about all the work done in affordable housing in Barcelona, that's been fantastic. Because there's if living in affordable housing means living in density, and how these projects have been making or living in density much more attractive, and how this living in density in this affordable housing in the projects we know from Barcelona help to build these other scales of community that Felipe was talking about.
I don't know the answer. It's a really difficult question, but I imagine what we were trying to say, or what the exhibition also underlines, is that this work, this amount of work of a variety of different scale of facilities all around the different neighborhoods, this idea that the periphery had to have the same treatment as the center, that it had to have the same pavement, you say? The same kind of qualities, the same kind of public health system, the same kind of beautiful schools. All this has, in a way, helped to sort of distribute a kind of level of public access. This doesn't mean that the houses aren't being, that the people in these neighborhoods aren't being evicted. But I'm sure that if it wasn't for these facilities, the level of crisis, the level of crime, the level of anger would be much higher, because in some of these neighbors, 50%, I don't know the numbers now exactly, but in some of these neighbors, 30% or 40% of the people don't have work. So imagine what it would happen if there was not only a bar to drink, but also a social space to discuss, or the health center to go and get cured if you have something. The school where send the children for free. So all this net of public facilities has done a lot to the quality of the life, basically.
But if I could add to that, not directly related to the exhibition, but yes, to your question, I think it's very important that we don't understand affordable housing in a larger blanket statement. That in many ways, a lot of these initiatives that we're seeing in cities has to do with offering multiple options in the context of affordable housing, right? That if you actually want to live in the periphery, you might have access to services. If you actually want to live in the center and live in density, you might have the right to be able to have an affordable housing in that context. And in that sense, I think for me, as we look towards the future, it's as important to guarantee a significant amount of land in the inner city that could be subsidized for affordable housing, as it actually is to be able to move centralities, right, to the periphery, for example, to shorten commuting times. I mean, in this project that we've been working in Porto Alegre, the two, something we discussed with Clay Strange, who's been collaborating with me on this, is that the two key issues that sort of most people ask in affordable housing is shorter commute times and daycare. And if you actually provide those two conditions, the productivity of the city increases drastically. So I think that this dialogue between sort of amenities, services, and affordable domestic space becomes critical in both directions.
Well, I think something that we said many times in Piso Piloto was that we have to stop thinking that your house is something, it's just the space that you pay in your mortgage, or it's of course the door is also your house, the stair is your house, the bar that is in front of is your house. If you have a metro station, is your house, the plaza that is next is your house. So we should build a new formula which tells you what is about your house, and and to start thinking about the city as part of your house, instead of doing the opposite. So that's what we were saying, to do an inside-out strategy instead of what we've been doing in Barcelona and in many places. In Medellin, for instance, they are starting to have exactly the same problem, like to think that it's a top-down construction of like this positive metastasis, as they said in Barcelona at that point, which was like to recuperate a public space and then try that this metastasis ends up making your house better. And this is, I would say, we should start doing the opposite. Let's start thinking and knowing exactly how is your house, and then end up constructing a new idea of a city, which is your house, of course.
Okay, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation, but I think we've raised some really interesting points on how we can develop new paradigms for a more socially just city, and how these can be adapted across context, whether it's looking in the inner city versus the suburbs, or a city like Barcelona versus Latin America.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yang Ding Liang. I'm a Doctor of Design candidate and a teaching fellow at Harvard GST. I'm working with and studying from Professor Joan Busquets. Our panel is going to tackling the issue of merging the open space and nature, and also constructing an efficient urban metabolism. The city, the metropolis, is a place of coexistence, tolerance, and socialization, and therefore the place of creation of culture. In this sense, what facilitates this urbanity is not only the buildings themselves, but more the space in between the buildings that are truly belongs to urban public realm. From a physical point of view, the city is made by public space. This is what is fundamental and what defines what is urban within 21st century. High-quality public space that adequately provides for different social, commercial, cultural, and educational events and activities can promote public communications and participations. In this sense, designing and making public spaces as a main driver for renovating and improving the city has become a common ground for contemporary urban practice. Besides, for metropolis, the idea of public space should also extend beyond the scale in between the buildings. The planning of cities today is deeply tied to managing their environmental impact and urging for more comprehensive open space systems that can begin to function as an ecologically sustainable landscape across all scales, from metropolitan to the urban scale of each one of the cities that comprise it, and from the human scales of its citizens to the microscopic scale of anything that may contribute to the enhancement of urban diversity. In Metro Barcelona, its network of open space consisting of streets, squares, parks, connects to different agriculture and natural areas, strengthen local biological ecologies, increasing space for leisure and supporting agricultural productive capacities. The green infrastructure acts as an environmental and social network constituting one of the major backbones of the metropolis. The intentional interconnection of the environmental matrix formed by mountains, rivers, streams, beaches, and agricultural areas with existing public space have successfully created a rich, varied mixture of urban density and ecological diversity. Now we are going to hear more articulated thinkings from our distinguished panelists, Eric Battle, Anita Berisbeitia, and Carles Corsas. Eric Battle is a professor in the Polytechnical University of Catalonia, UPC, and the Weill School of Architecture. His research, The Garden of the Metropolis, From Romantic Landscape to Open Space for a Sustainable City, has been awarded the Louis Dominique Montaigne Prize for Architecture Theory and Criticism, as well as the FAD Series Review 2012 Prize. His presentation today will address green as main structure for Barcelona. Our second speaker is Anita Berisbeitia, Professor of Landscape Architecture and Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture in Harvard GSD. Her research focuses on design series of modern and contemporary landscape architecture, the productive aspects of landscapes in Latin American cities and landscapes. She was awarded the 2005 to 2006 Prince Chadwick Chest Roman Prize Fellowship in Landscape Architecture and other many various awards. She is also a very influential writer for different publications, including the most recent Urban Landscape, Critical Concepts in Built Environments. Her presentation today titled New Ways to Design with Nature. Carlos Corsas is a professor at School of Architecture and a current vice dean for international relationship at ETSAB, Barcelona. He is also a senior researcher at the Barcelona Laboratory of Urbanism, where he is coordinator and participant in various international projects dealing with historical grid transformation, collective urban spaces, and co-generative design. His presentation today titled Values of Public Space. Please join me and welcome our panelists, and we will start with Eric Battle.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Dean, Joan, Ramon, Diane. Thank you very much for to stay here. Well, I will begin my presentation speaking about the other 50%. And Ramon, before, show you a map of the metropolis of Barcelona and say that there are, in this moment, the open space in Barcelona are more than the 50%. But the people that live in Barcelona don't think this, no? What happened? Why people think others? Also, I will say that more or less, I in my presentation, I won't show Ramblas or Born or Parc de la Ciutadella or Paseo de Gracia, because Barcelona is more than all these things, no? More. And my presentation is more about another kind of spaces. My presentation will be in different videos. But before this, I also want to speak about the word. Normally I use other words, but Joan discovered me a verb in English that I didn't know before. That was the verb merging. That now I begin to use in all the presentations that I do. Because thanks, Joan, I like very much the word merging, because normally I use more other titles, no, for my presentations. Many times I use The Garden of the Metropolis, that is then the title of my book, no? for the reason to try to sell the book, no? But now I begin to use merging, no? Because I think that express very well the things that now I will present to you. Well, I suppose that the videos will work. The first picture that you say is possible to see in the exhibition, that it's here in the hall, no? About this giga photo that we do last year, that tried to explain that our streets can change, can renaturalize, no? The streets, the squares, our houses, no? And connect with the natural space that we still have, no? But also to the agricultural lands that also still remain, and also the rivers, and all our spaces, open spaces, that we have in the city. Agricultural land, rivers, sea. It's possible to establish a network about these spaces. Connectivity is possible. Why people don't understand that we have all these spaces in our city? Well, this is the question, no, that we try to find, no? Also, we work a lot with these three words that are three words that came from different people that work in the team, in our team, in the PDU with Area Metropolitana, no? Ecology, leisure, and production. When we begin to work with this, we work with a biologist that speak about ecology, with agronomists that speak about production, and with an architect, me, that I don't like they say that I speak about leisure. And then we put together the three words, and from this day we decided that the three speak about the three things, no? Together, because the three things works at the same time: ecology, leisure, and production. Well, now the title of my presentation is Green as Main Structure for Barcelona or for the city. How is possible to do this? I like to work in all the scales. The scale that begin in the ecological matrix that many people draw, no? Like there is, now you see here a map with mountains, rivers, agricultural lands in the scale of the satellite of Barcelona. But if we move to a place, call it Viladecans, no, we can see that we are also interested in other scales, no? In the scale of the system parks. I like Olmsted. I like Boston. I always explain the system park of Boston. I think that it's still alive. I don't know if it's this the word in English. No? We like to put together the three scales: the scale of the ecology, the scale of the landscape architecture, and also the scale of the urban planning. This travel that is possible to do through all the scales, from the satellite to the magnific glass. To understand better this, we will move to 4 different places for different ideas. The first idea will be about connected spaces. Connectivity, ecological and social connectivity, the biodiversity, the continuity, the relation with the different cities that we have in between or near all these natural spaces. No? This bridge that we built here to connect the city with the river that don't exist before and was impossible to cross this space and to arrive to the natural corridor that is Llobregat in this case. Ecological and social connectivity always. We work always thinking and the people is in movement. We don't use benches now. We say that it's not necessary to put benches because people, it's always in movement, no? Walking from one place to other. Well, it's not exactly true, but more or less is the idea. No? Is the idea that we try to connect one place with the other place, from one city, from the other city, crossing the natural and spaces that still remain in our city. The second idea is about productive landscapes. In this part of the city that also is an edge, a boundary, a limit of the city, we try to understand how it's possible to work with productive landscapes. Here it's very simple, the idea, biodiversity also, connectivity, grow areas in the border of the city, more density in this place that was empty before. And in this part, we design a park that it's the extension of the natural park, and we design this big avenue that we plan with different seats. One of the seats was alfalfa. And then what happened? Happened that in this area of Barcelona still remain a shepherd, no? Call it Cayetano. Cayetano is in the left. Now we are, well, the other day I present Ramon to Cayetano because there are different conflicts, no? With Cayetano, for example, with the bikers, no? But also with the police that say that the police of this city don't know if this is good or is not good. No? It's a question also for the audience. No? Do you think that this is good or not? No? These are students from my master that the other day work with the sheep here, no? With this idea that we call now farming the life. I like now these words, farming the life, because what things we want to farm in the city? Well, we can farm food kilometer zero, but also we can farm energies, materials for new things, but also the recuperation of the life. No? The third, it's about another place, no? Call it Sant Cugat, that we designed many years ago, and I will try to explain the idea of living on the edge, no? To draw the new edges inside the city. In this place, we designed a new part of the city that you can see now in this place. That now it's the coldest of the city. It's the place that the temperature is lower in Sant Cugat. No? It's also a corridor with biodiversity that connect with the exterior, the grow areas near the park. And in this area, well, is the idea that, well, we want connectivity, we want produced landscapes. What we try to design, we need to design better edges in all these parts. No? The relationship between the urban fabric and the natural spaces that we want to conserve and extend is the most important place to build the new parts of our city, no? Always in relation. This point that is between two parts, no? We say in our office that we always are in the middle, between one part and the other. We are not in the city or in the natural spaces. We are always in the edge. I like to live in the edge, no? And to cross all the barriers and to all the walls that we are built in our cities. To design strategic limits, I think, is one of the best parts of all the plans, and especially for PDU in our city that have a 50% with a space like that. And the last one, it's, well, to visit another project that we do, that it's outside the city, but it's not outside the city, it's in the city, because it's the waste landfill, the place where we put the waste during 40 years, 4 million people. So, sometimes we say that it's the more urban part of our city. No? In this part, is to say that, well, where is possible to work in this way that I say? We say always, no? In all the places, anytime, anywhere, because we need to change our house, like Josep say, no? We can change the streets, our public transportation system, but, well, also we can change all the places, including the worst part of the city. The worst part of the city that now is restored with our project. Now it's presented in Venezia. This is our stand in Biennale of Venezia, also presented with Farming the Life, with this idea. No? And this man now, this boy that is walking in our project, no, will show that all the ideas are connected. No? He's walking because he perhaps is arriving from the center of Barcelona, from Las Ramblas, no? And arrive here, no? To this space that also is a space, is a productive landscape because we design as agriculture, no? But also it's a new edge of the city, no? And show us how it's possible to change all the parts of our city. The obsolete parts, the parts that now has another part. Well, to finish with this idea of green as main structure for the city, to say only one thing, that when I explain things like that, people say, well, but the important thing, like Josep say, is the small house, the house for everybody, or the important thing is the public transportation, or the important thing are the economics, the social problems. And I always say the same, well, yes, but in all the projects, perhaps the second thing that is important is things like that. And for this reason I say always there are one objective, and the second objective can be an objective for a new structure, green structure for our cities. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My comments in this short presentation are partly a response to the exhibition outside, partly a call to my students, but also a response to the widespread representation of the urban landscape as surface green in most architectural, landscape architectural projects or even planning and other design fields. So I want to propose that we need to look beyond the green when we think about landscape, so that we can understand more precisely how they work in the city, and then make better decisions in the design of cities, given our current and future challenges. So, as is demonstrated on the show outside, we know that there are many, many kinds of different green in the city, many urban landscape types. And it has to be stressed, perhaps, obviously, that they're associated with different conceptual frameworks that need to situate them in different constituencies, functions, formats, and institutions. So perhaps a first approach to thinking beyond the green would be to invent new techniques to describe, landscapes beyond the green to focus on the differences. That is, cartographic representations of the urban ground need to more specifically move away from the traditional distributional map, which shows location and size, to causal temporal maps, or ones that explore and demonstrate the urban ground as a contested space where competing interests are constantly vying for the occupation of that ground. So cartographies that, for example, explore and this is a very useful example of that we see in the show outside. What is interesting here is that, so first they begin to typologize something that is systemic, so a kind of hybrid interpretation. But when we see that against that, it really shows that there's a problem, right? Especially a problem when that is, when this is expected to become somehow built. You know, if you have twice the size of land available, twice as big as that, one has to begin to question exactly really what that should be. Should it be forest? Should it be agriculture? Should it be many more other things on the city? So, in other words, this kind of insightful comparison can yield productive conversations about the future in a more open way. These types of drawings and their scalar and spatial implications point to the need to really think very broadly about what the future of the city is, including the future of its landscape. And then related to this, I think it's very important to distinguish between the green that is, say, geological and the green that is fabricated. And this is an issue that is very important in participatory democracies because when we're talking about public realm and people have to vote on these things, they need to understand much more deeply what the green is so that the culture can evolve. So likewise, what are the parts that are planned versus the part that are emerging? As Enrique just mentioned, this is a really interesting issue. Likewise, the need for the appropriate pairing of particular scales of drawing and statistics. So a zoomed out view of a metropolitan area that perhaps rightly so, let me see, I'm losing track of where okay. And this drawing here is especially important, for instance, because not all trees are the same. So this is a really interesting document that has been proposed by the Harvard Forest. They've challenged Massachusetts to eat from its own food by the year 2050. That requires that the forest land be converted into agricultural land. So this is obviously a very important conversation that has consequences in the urban ground. But this kind of analysis where not all the trees shown the same, but to show that they have actually important, different environmental functions is key to begin to understand how we design. So back to the statistical point, to say that a city has a 50-50 distribution of built to green is not enough. More fine-scale analysis will give light into issues of environmental equity because not everybody has equal access to that. So a second technique that should be more commonly used, it's been used, but we should do more about it, is comparative studies. So cities compete globally for markets, as this exhibition demonstrates as well. And the comparative studies in the show give us a good understanding of how geography and economy come together at a global scale. But that needs to be studied to this, extended to the study of the green. Because and the green in the regional urban landscape, if not the municipal as well. For example, this is a very brilliant case, 1892, Charles Eliot and Sylvester Baxter used exactly a comparison with London and Paris to demonstrate that Boston did not have enough green space, and to in fact educate the people on the need. To the point that was made yesterday about knowledge transfer, it actually needs to be translated. So the United States had a very different land tenure system, and a fundamental piece of Baxter and Eliot's work was to, in fact, convince people and to generate the legislation. And so that drawing is actually part of the law, as well as many of the other drawings that we know from that project. So today, comparative studies with other cities are increasingly important for the reasons that we need to learn as well from what works and doesn't work in other cities. The Trust for Public Lands and other organizations already do some of this very useful work, but a lot more work in this sense is needed to turn this into a design instrument. Comparative studies are also useful to get to questions of the carrying capacity of the landscape. Not only public recreational space, but infrastructure. What is the carrying capacity of the urban landscape? It is remarkable that a city like Barcelona has 8 million tourists in a city of 3 million. And how is that impacting? We've heard about how it impacts gentrification and prices of housing. But it also, the urban surface is highly sensitive to use, and how can that be quantified in a way that helps better decision making? A second set of observations is that landscapes do not come by themselves. They are put there by policy, institutions, budgets, and recently from more locally based or ground-up activism. So another reason to look beyond the green is to differentiate between the kinds of institutions that advocate and protect those landscapes, because jurisdiction over the urban surface will become increasingly complex. And I just want to point you to the attention of the absolute impossibility and intractability of something like that. But also that is an opportunity, because if we find synergies between institutions, then I think more public landscapes can be sustained or created over time. And the and in addition, that means that the institutions that already exist will need to change their identity and have more porous borders so that they can talk to one another and have greater effect. So, for instance, a very wonderful example is an institution out in Concord, Massachusetts. This is 15 miles from here. Where we have a historic landscape, we have a homeless problem in Boston, and we have the need to keep fallow land productive. And so you can see what I mean. You have historic preservation, social causes, and environmental management here coming together to connect people from the inner city with an environment that is usually not available to them. And it makes me think, is this the work of designers in the future? And how do we get this to happen? Because it doesn't happen unless it is made to happen. Finally, to the long list of urban landscape types, we will need to add more in the future with different institutions that support and maintain them. So with current challenges of climate change, energy, food security, accessibility to clean water, more demands will be placed on the landscape. Density, which is something usually ascribed to buildings only will need to be projected onto the ground, with increasing contestation of space, therefore, how will density play itself out in the urban surface? And it has to be then, therefore, through hybridization, where monofunctional spaces become obsolete, and instead this kind of section that indicates the sort of joining of one commission in the city with another one begins to be to make landscapes that are more possible by stacking their functions literally and institutionally to produce what we know are multifunctional, multi-layered urban environments that do more than one thing. Almost done. In the case of the project in Bordeaux, secondly, we need to find more places for new landscapes and new uses for it. This well-known case of the project in Bordeaux by Michel Devigne. These are landscapes that emerge as transitional strategies in terms of their status in the city. Between shifting economic systems in that city. So large plots of newly forested land in many ways have an ambiguous classification in terms of what we typically associate with urban landscapes. Yet they broaden the categories precisely of what is possible. And then in the case of the Louvre Lens, the physical traces of the coal mining history were requalified and reformulated and to turn them from negative side effect to positive urban framework. And here are the side projects that, of course, make possible that within the museum understood as an integral piece of that plan. So one often utilized notion is that of the good life that is delivered through easy access to well-designed parks, plazas, vegetable gardens, recreational and natural spaces, and clean water and air within easy reach of everyone's daily routine. But I have to emphasize that this is clearly aspirational and a tall order in most parts of the world, including in the United States. Looking beyond the green and into the different ways that green is more precisely argued for, represented and positioned in its broader institutional, economic, and social context, will give it its due relevance in today's city, such that the green will continue to exist. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. First, thanks to Professor Busquets, Mosavi, Davis, and Mr. Ramon Torra for making it possible, for organizing this intense and interesting forum in which we have been invited. According with the two previous presentations, I decided to change a bit my title, or the initial title, probably moving from this idea of open space and landscape to an idea of open space and intensity through this idea of the collective spaces as a guarantee of a diverse city. So I would like to go through some dimensions of the contemporary meaning of collective spaces in Barcelona at the metropolitan scale. I suggest taking from the former exhibition and also of the catalog the concept of collective centers strongly related with collective spaces, highlighting the symbolic and essential role of them as sites, significant sites that are initially made up of representative public spaces and contiguous buildings, and how this scheme is diversified in different combinations that make more complex our urbanity. This suggestive image that is in the catalog of a kind of a spider web is the first systemic interpretation of the multiple combinations and links. Let me see if that runs. It's not this. See, yeah, it's running. First, the herds of traditional districts and towns spread all over the territory, configuring one of the quintessence of this metropolis of cities. I come back to the title. Composed, as you know, of squares, ramblas, bell towers, and town halls, they illustrate a characteristic urban landscape increasingly appreciated by citizens because of their local community atmosphere. As in the past, they are meaningful places that embody a strong local identification. Who knows if, as it is, as already happens in some central Barcelona districts, some of these other town centers could broaden their scope to become also elements of the metropolitan imaginary. Altogether, depict this image, that is the discontinuous polynuclear structure of the metropolis, that explains very well the strength of our municipalities, yesterday that was mentioned, a structure that was already organized in the traditional plans of the 20th century, like in the 50s, that should be now projected further. However, we know that this, sorry, because I move, I am lost. Which is, this one or this one? This one? Okay, that was the plan, the county plan of the 50s. However, as I was saying, we know that the family of these urban spaces is wider, and it is, today we have a much more complex urban network, also composed of other expressions of collectiveness, like this one. Professor Robert showed us before some of the housing estates current situations, and I think that it's a good example of how these central collective spaces have been strengthened in the last decade through determined public policies and investment, tackling the risk of social marginalization in these areas. At a larger scale, also described before by Professor Batlle, we know that these fantastic beaches and linear parks are the most celebrated metropolitan open air structures, and I'd like to highlight here how they reinforce the metropolitan awareness, making the metropolis more intelligible, scanning the seafront, scanning the river valleys, viewing the whole city from above. Indeed, the Tibidabo theme park on the top of Collserola inaugurated 1 century ago this tradition of creating a common place from which the metropolis dimension can be understood. It has also been mentioned this successful marriage of facilities and open spaces, especially fruitful in the last few decades, with a normal proliferation of new facilities. We have interesting or excellent small and medium size facilities in Central Eixample. However, there is still a long road ahead to improve the placement of the large facilities, hospitals, universities, research centers, etc., sometimes forming huge conglomerates not very well articulate and all dispersed all over the metropolitan area. in these coordinates, even more difficult, it is still more uncertain to know what or how we could integrate many shopping areas. We are not only, our metropolis is not a compact city, but also a polycentric city with a lot of different expressions that all located in the outskirts of the towns and the cities. Maybe we wonder if we could extrapolate some experience on the urban commercial centers. It's probably difficult, but it is worth to deal with. For example, if we take some internal urban examples, we can pay attention on how they have tackled to improve the connection with public transport hubs, or how they have mixed or added some mixed complementary programs. In these both cases, very well known for the local auditorium, we know that the challenge is how to enable the interaction between these contiguous large and small commercial structures. Both very important. It was yesterday highlighted by Professor Busquets in the presentation of the last part here of the exhibition, regarding how to merge the thin network of a small retail establishment and the large artifacts with franchise that in both cases we should be able to create some links to improve the urban fluidity. The geography of the potential collective spaces at this metropolitan scale now depicts this alternative picture of the whole metropolis that is the basis of a polycentric, not polynuclear structure that blurs the borders of the 36 municipalities and thus becomes a more complex composition. Beyond the ecological value of the public spaces, we have been discussing about many interesting combinations, like the one with infrastructure that was addressed in the first roundtable with the excellent presentation of the keynote speaker in many ways. But I would like to focus your attention in a very, very singular case of this space at the end of the Diagonal forum area, where a large platform is or has become one of the best metropolitan open spaces for large-scale events. And how this platform is constructed directly on top of an enormous water treatment plant. So that is serving a population of 3 million inhabitants. So it's really remarkable with this very exceptional overlap of urban metabolism and open space. So with dancers and water treatment at the same time in the same place. By definition, collective spaces are an incubator as well as a product of urban diversity. In this sense, it's interesting to share at the end of the presentation some ongoing urban processes related with two elements or two components that have not been mentioned before, or especially mentioned before, that is creativity and innovation, and how they are motors for urban transformation, especially sensitive to social inclusiveness. According with its size, they could seem apparently minor cases, but for me it's important to mention them in the way they try to, or they achieve to interlink the neighboring scale with metropolitan scope, something that is crucial in the metropolitan construction. First, in a former warehouse on the border of a working class neighborhood of Barcelona, the Ateneo of neighborhood, Nou Barris, was born in a mixed cultural environment. Mixed environment not for tourists, but because of the high rates of immigration in this district. Of course, far from the city center. It's a fabulous case of self-managed cultural social community center that links artistic production with the social inclusiveness. The former space occupied by neighborhoods became initially a successful space for the interaction of young people in risk of social exclusion through a social circus. And then it was a scale-up, becoming a metropolitan reference. Second, in another popular district, also in the eastern part of the city, it's like Londres is west and western, the social pressure of local residents achieved to conserve a former factory complex, especially interesting also in heritage terms, and that pushed the municipality to transform this interesting complex, Fabra and Coats factory, into a collective site for cultural and social activities. It hosts now a factory of creativity and also at the same time several welfare public services. So children, youngsters, senior citizens, artists and makers are today joining at the same time simultaneously this place, and something important that the old factory, 1 century later, I'm finishing, is once again the social motor of the transformation of this neighborhood, the updating of this neighborhood. And finally, the most well-known and large example, the 22 Innovation District, it has been mentioned before and also in the exhibition. You know that it was was born as a new knowledge economy district, settled in a former industrial area. But maybe it's not so known that this process happens after that this district has become appropriate for the artist. So you can imagine that after the initial typical shock between the flagship urban project, top-down, and the more specific activities, there is an ongoing process today of recomposition through the synergies of Poblenou creativity and 22at innovation in an interesting mix with some expressions like the Poblenou urban districts in the map and with probably a low impact still now in the open spaces that are still a combination of some sporadic forms. Anyway, that's not something something genuine of our city, but we are sharing this kind of processes with other cities like Berlin, London, or Zurich, or Copenhagen. Finally, I would like to say that on the whole, renewed and diverse nature of the culture of the collective spaces is the best argument against the so-called mixophobia, in words of Zygmunt Bauman. You know, mixophobia as the fears brought about by a special planning that separates and homogenizes the city, not the American city, but also the European setting. Therefore, as they have been in the past, we are quite confident that these collective spaces are today and in the future an opportunity to create the 21st century diverse city. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation, and thank you very much for the sharing of very inspiring points, such as Eric has mentioning about the connection between the space, open space and nature. The connection is very important. And Anita mentions the broaden the scope and scale of urban landscape, as well as Carlos mentions the collective space and open space as an catalyst for the intellectual urban development. I want starting this conversation by posing a question that the topic of our panel has two parts. One is the merging of open space and nature, and second is constructing the urban metabolism. So the first part has quite clear. How do you think about the system of nature and open space can contribute to urban metabolism? And then we will open to the audience.
Well, I think it's the same, but perhaps I want to speak now about, I speak about movement before, but there are many movements, no? Flows. I like the one expression about Professor Busquets, no? That our city, or the cities are a different group of meshes, mallas, meshes, no? The different flows. No? The idea of movement is not only for people, it's life, it's water. And if we think only in movement, when I like very much all the things that today everybody presented, no? But many part of the maps that the urban designers like are static maps. Perhaps because we don't know the system to draw the movement. For the reason I begin to work with the videos, no? But this is the first presentation with videos that I do, no? But I think that it's important to think in the flows, no? The water is in movement, it's not static. The places are in movement, people, animals, and all the things. And I think that if everybody, when we are designing, we think in this idea of movements, then begin to change many things in the system to do a new urban planning in our cities.
Well, if we're thinking about metabolism, we inevitably have to think about what inflows and outflows and inputs of energy and what we produce. And my insistence on let's not talk about all the water being the same, all the green being the same. In other words, not all the flows are the same, is that we can better understand that depending on machines for the metabolism is not going to be sustainable in the future. That we actually have to understand what nature as biology can do for the city, how much we need of it and where to put it. And until we distinguish between what that is and how it works for that aspect of the city, the metabolic aspect, and how we can overlap for efficiencies with recreation and so forth. We're really not going to, we're just passing one problem to the, to the next municipality and not really thinking collectively or efficiently about how to go about that.
Okay, thank you. For the sake of time, we'll probably directly open to the audience. We have.
Hello. Okay. In the previous panel, Lisa Hollywood said that social justice is not only about affordable housing, also to the access to public space and different facilities of the city, and also. Felipe Correa said, for me, one important statement that one important thing is the break between the right to the city and the right to the housing. If we read the Right to the City book, it's always about accessibility. It's access to different things of the city and of the regions. The Enrique and Anita lectures talks all about accessibility, about how to connect different things. But the reality in the city is we have a really fragmented city and different processes in the city, especially private developers, also the construction of new parks, are frequently isolated. So how can we deal, or what could be the most important strategies to produce connectivity, different types of accessibility between different parts of the city, to produce this connection between people and this right of the city that the Professor Felipe Correa said before?
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. Actually, we've seen many projects today, also in your presentations, that taking nature and public spaces as a design instrument in the transformation of the cities. So my question is more about the future. So looking forward, what do you see would be the potentials or potential paradigms for the public or collective spaces as more like a political and social agenda in the collaborations between public and private kind of developments?
Just mixing different comments and maybe adding something to the debate. I think that it's very remarkable, this approach of the landscape or the ecological landscape as, creating this idea of the continuity of the system that is really efficient in terms of metabolic and ecological issues. But at the same time, I think that in certain metropolitan settings, it's also important to know how to combine this idea of the ecology with the idea of the intensity. That was a bit the point I was trying to put on the table in my presentation. I think that as we have just now landed in this new paradigm of the ecology and the metabolic urbanism as this idea of the cycles and the functioning, I think that a challenge in next years would be just to know how to merge, to merge, these two ideas, the intensity always or usually related with urbanity, at least in our latitudes, and this idea of the landscape. There is important progress, of course, but I think that is still a long road ahead just to improve and to discuss about that.
For the first question, for me it's always very useful to look at the history of the landscape in the city, because they're very different. In a place like Boston, and I would say any city that had a post-colonial condition in the American continent, all the land was privately held. And it was privately held until the mechanisms were put for that land to be set aside to become public. And that's a very different process historically than, say, for instance, when a city like Barcelona is already planned. I'm thinking of the Cerdà Ensanche, already with public lands set aside or public spaces set aside. Everything in the American continent tends to privatization, excuse me. Everything tends to privatization. Even today, we are more and more reliable on public-private partnerships in order to create public spaces. And that has different manifestations. Sometimes it's with the creation of these conservancies, because the municipalities cannot take care of public spaces that already exist. Every important public park in this country has a privately non-for-profit conservancy that takes care of the management and the funding of that public space. And in addition to that, when there are, say, state lands that are transferred to the municipality for public space, like Brooklyn Bridge Park, then it is now stated that that public space has to be self-financed. And the only way to self-finance that is through private development, which exists in the Brooklyn Bridge Park. So we are in a more and more sort of complex condition where the kind of idealism of the state providing for the just city is increasingly difficult. So I think that is why I focus on the institutional structure of public space, and the need to think creatively about how to get them to do more and to have more impact across sectors of society. And perhaps this is what we need to do in the future as designers, to really imagine how that would happen so that we can make it happen, because at least in North and South America, that is very difficult to do, given that there is such a short history of public lands.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Only to add a little thing, that well, in relation with the question, that many of the projects, as Felipe showed in different parts, are projects that are designed inside their edge, no? Their limits. And I think that there are many reasons, many things to do to resolve these problems, but one of the solutions is to break these edges, no? To infiltrate outside the relation between the project and outside, like the wonderful projects that Marion showed us before, no? That some of them broke all the borders, no? Are not only the project, are in relation with all the things.
Thank you very much for the sincere answers and kind share. We will take no more questions. So we are going. Thank you for staying here. We are going to leave the stage to Eulalia Gomez, the assistant professor from Polytechnical University of Catalonia, along with Andrea Serczuk, the assistant professor of urban planning at Harvard GSD, for conclusion.
Thank you, Yang. We don't have an easy job today, as we have 15 minutes to summarize how we can redefine urban design. So we have in the first rows all the lecturers of the open house session yesterday, also the panelists today, our keynote speaker this morning. And I think that it's luckily the presentations made quite rich jigsaw of ideas or of concerns of that are important in some of the metropolis today. So let's try to make in this short conversation with Andres, let's try to make some light or do this wrapping of the ideas that have arose during these 2 days. So.
Yeah, indeed. We thought instead of trying to present back, we'll have a discussion and conversations of some of the key issues that seem to emerge. And I'll let Aurelia start. And we both have a sort of list of topics that seem to emerge throughout the day through various things evoked by the wonderful speakers today.
I think one of the main topics, maybe it's about scale. It arose in the 3 roundtables. It appeared when talking about infrastructure. Professor Parcerisa talked about this contact between the sidewalks and the asphalt, but then Mirko Sardini asked us to think about infrastructures in this regional scale, in this huge scale. It also appeared when talking about the galaxy of subway systems in most cities of the world, in 180 cities, I think they were. It also appeared when talking about housing. Josep Boigas and also Felipe Correa told us about the new typologies or new policies for developing housing systems, but also Maria Ruber told us about housing is not only a matter of dwellings, of how to live in these places, but also of neighborhoods. Neighborhoods have to have these new centralities, this mixing of activities, so it's not living, it's not only about having a home, but also of having access to jobs, access to variety of central activities. And this topic of scale also appeared when talking about this in this last roundtable, talking about natural and open spaces, we heard about this natural matrix of the metropolis, mainly in Barcelona. Enric Batlle showed us these amazing videos about, with squares, but also with sheep and, and farming life. And it's about this matrix, but also it's about bars. Josep Bohigas showed us these bars. These are also open spaces, public spaces in the metropolis. So maybe this mixing of scales, this going from micro to regional, from satellite to this magnifying glass should be one of the topics to keep in mind in terms of design.
Indeed, and then I think it comes very clearly through at the exhibit that the focus of what is considered urban design today is not at a site scale, is not at a project scale, but it's really entered the territory of the metropolitan area, which is an enormous challenge because metropolitan areas historically have not been designed. They have grown through multiple complex processes, and to address this big formation called the metropolitan area through urban design questions, I think puts us in a very difficult and alien territory that nobody has very clear answers to. But I think it comes very clearly through in the case of Barcelona that the city has attempted to do that the metropolitan area has attempted to tackle issues of the metropolitan scale very consciously. But I do think that the ability to do so is also very, very specific to Barcelona and to each context. I mean, I think Barcelona is actually very lucky to have a metropolitan planning authority. Most cities do not have such an authority with a budget and with an institutional power to actually guide issues of metropolitan scale. Boston has a metropolitan authority which has no money or power. London it doesn't really. Paris doesn't either, even though the president has a directive to address Grand Paris as a project, but it's really more ambitious than a reality. So I think Barcelona is a unique case in where both institutional mechanisms and the kind of interest of urban designers collide to make it possible to actually study urban issues at the metropolitan scale.
Thanks, Andres, for reminding us, people from Barcelona, that we are lucky of having these people caring about us. Maybe another topic could be the publicness of metropolis or of urban topics. It also appeared when talking of infrastructures. There was a question among the audience who, there was someone who asked us, okay, when an infrastructure becomes good, or when is it bad for citizens? So it's something. It has to be understood like a public thing, or so with an impact to the citizens. It also appeared when with housing. Bohigas started talking about housing, but he started his presentation about housing talking about public space. So it's housing is something that is hidden, so we have to put attention in it because it's hidden, it's outside this public space. And also here in this last presentation, when Enric Batlle told us about Barcelona, and he started saying, okay, I'm not starting with the main images of public spaces that you are expecting from Barcelona, not the Ramblas, not the seafront, not the beaches. So.
I think that that's true. There was a lot of concern throughout several speakers' presentations about the public space and infrastructure. And I think, to me at least, one of the key points that comes across is that pedestrians and the space at the pedestrian scale is back in the smack center of urban design. We've gone through eras of the 1960s and 70s where cars have dominated the discussion, where other issues than pedestrian have dominated the discussion. But I think it's very clear from the case of Barcelona and what we saw in Hong Kong and many other parts of the world that pedestrian space and pedestrian quality of the urban environment is back at the top of the hierarchy in the discussion today. And there is, I think it's maybe telling from what we see in different rankings of cities, whether it's The Economist, the Mercer, the monocle. There's not a single city in the top 10 of high-quality cities in the world that is not pedestrian-friendly. And I think Barcelona is an example case where that has been a very conscious policy, the improvement of neighborhood-scale amenities, the improvements of public space, etc. But I think we've come sort of full circle from maybe the last few decades, putting the pedestrian back into the focus of the urban design discussion.
Yeah, actually, there was a panelist, I can't remember who, but who told us that infrastructure is not against pedestrians. So
yes, indeed. But I think what's also very interesting today is that we're not talking about pedestrianization in an extreme term, such as, for instance, taking Venice as the ideal urban environment where we have nothing but pedestrians. I think everybody acknowledges that contemporary cities need interconnectivity at multiple scales. We absolutely rely on international connectivity with airports and high-speed train stations, at the regional connectivity, etc. And these issues of how infrastructure at different speeds starts colliding in a desirable way in the contemporary city so as not to create enormous pedestrian barriers, and how large infrastructure and this small infrastructure of that we saw in Barcelona and we saw in Hong Kong come together, I think starts posing really interesting 21st century design questions. In some ways, I think it's the kind of question that maybe Le Corbusier and the Chandigarh posed long ago, which is how do we overlay 7 types of systems of mobility on top of each other so that it actually results in a desirable urban form. But I think we can come back to that question with much better tools and much better understandings of the city today. I think that starts coming through as well.
I mean, I think that it's that we can think that urbanism or urban planning or urban design, whatever, however we want to call it, or however we decide that we have to call it, is the tool for solving like these big, small cross issues, and maybe it's about something that Joan Busquets told us yesterday. It's about having these strategies that we have to follow, but we have to kind of knock to each city to see how can we adapt these lessons that we learn from other cities, from other metropolis, to adapt them into every specific reality. So.
I think actually that points to one of the key paradoxes or questions that, at least for me, started coming out in the conference, which is, indeed, on the one hand, all of the examples and solutions we saw are hyper-contextual. What was done in Barcelona is very specific to Barcelona. Its institutional history, its planning history, its democracy, frankly, getting people mobilized behind the projects to support these small-scale interventions and ask for them politically, I think is very specific to Barcelona. What we saw in Hong Kong is unique. No other city can have double, triple, and even 4-story pedestrian networks if you don't have the sort of density and history that Hong Kong has had. So I think that hyper-specificity is clear from the presentation, but also the paradox that emerges from that is that how then can we use urban design as a model, or how could we extrapolate lessons from one place to another and still make it possible without having to deeply investigate or have deeply local solutions? What is the kind of principle of knowledge transfer that was discussed yesterday? And I think Joan put out a very important point yesterday, which is that for urban solutions to get transferred, they have to be understood. They have to be understood not by architects and planners and urban designers, but the general public. If we do not get the political support behind ideas, they will never happen. They will never be carried out. And I think it's telling to look back into the 20th century and look at what sorts of solutions or models were the most replicated or the most popular. And I would argue that the modernist free plan sort of slab in the park or tower in the park model found enormous applicability around the world, much because it's a very cost-effective but also simple model to comprehend. It's a simple urban model. And if we want to see a future of more complex and arguably more sustainable, both economically, socially, and environmentally solutions, we have to be able to distill some of the ideas from Barcelona, from other cities, to templates that can be used elsewhere, because I think one of the general problems in today is that a lot of the rapidly growing cities of the Global South do not have the luxury of time or the technical capability to delve into extremely complex technical analysis before decision making. In fact, they're on such pressures that they have to make decisions very quickly and move very fast. And we can't spend years doing analysis for micro decisions. So models remain important, templates remain important, but the paradox that we don't have very clear answers for is how then, if things are hyperlocal and context sensitive, how can we draw the answers? How can we extract templates and models from successful places? How do we balance that local difference and context with replicability? And I think that's something we need to think about.
Don't you think they did really well? I mean, this is like a new TV anchors now for Fox News when things change. The Eulalia and Andres show. So thank you both very much. It was great. Really, thank you all. Thanks again to Joan. As you well know, all of our Spanish friends, the thing is they have lunch at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and they have dinner at 11 o'clock in the afternoon. So for them, this is like almost like mid-morning. And if the rest of us can at least get used to that, partly to the eating habits of the Catalans, why not get used to their architectural and urban design habits? So I think there is hope for all of us. Once again, thank you very much. Really think this will open up a lot of discussions for us in the school. Thanks to all the speakers, and thanks for all of you for persevering and being with us all day. Thank you.